Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL in Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, a step-by-step guide for APA-style student papers, which is sponsored by APA Style. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL in Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for important discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a couple of features of the webinar software. First off, everyone who joined the presentation as an attendee is automatically muted, and your cameras are disabled if you have them. So don't worry about generating noise or feedback. We've already taken care of that. The other thing to point out is in the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. And we're using the Q&A feature today, so please use it to ask questions of our speakers. At the end of the presentation, we're sure we'll have lots and lots of questions. We'll take some time to answer as many as we have time for. We've really only got about an hour today, so we apologize in advance if we can't get to all of your questions, but we will do our best to get to as many as we can. And also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. All right, so with that, we are ready to get started, and I will switch over our presentation here. And I will turn it over to our very first speaker, who is Haley Kamen.
Thank you, Mark, for introducing us. And just wait, here we go. Have the slides pulled up. So hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us and welcome to our webinar, A Step-by-Step Guide to APA-Style Student Papers. This webinar will walk through the formatting steps you need to accomplish in creating an APA-style student paper, starting with basic setup that applies generally to the entire document, and then the formatting for specific paper sections. Since we are conducting this webinar at the start of a new semester, we have chosen to focus it specifically on student papers. This means that everything we cover in the webinar applies to student papers, and there may be additional or different requirements for professional manuscripts being submitted to a journal. Fortunately, most formatting requirements apply to both student and professional papers, so the elements we'll be talking about for things like paper setup, text, tables and figures, and reference list apply no matter what type of APA-style paper you are writing. I'll also preface by saying that students should always check with their instructor or institution for specific guidelines when writing their student papers, which may be different than or in addition to those covered in this presentation. Listed here are the specific learning objectives for the webinar. As shown, we'll start by covering aspects of formatting that apply to the entire paper, including margins, font, line spacing, paragraph alignment and indentation, and page headers. And then we'll transition to the specific formatting elements that apply to particular sections commonly found in student papers, the title page, the text, tables and figures, and the reference list. Finally, we'll conclude by describing how student papers should be organized and steps students can take to improve the quality and presentation of their papers. For each slide, we have included the section number in the book where you can learn more or find more information. This is always shown in the bottom left corner of the slide. Because this presentation is geared towards students and the instructors who teach them, the section numbers correspond to the abridged student-specific version of the publication manual, which is the 7th edition concise guide to APA style. All section numbers apply to the concise guide unless specifically indicated otherwise. And all the content is also covered in the publication manual. The first section of the webinar is about how to set up your student paper. These are steps you'll take when you first open up your document and then not have to worry about again while writing your paper, because these are general aspects of of paper format, they apply to all APA style papers, student or professional. And this section emphasizes that no matter what type of paper you're writing and what type of word processing program you use, and a couple of the most common ones, Google Docs, Microsoft Word, and Academic Writer are shown here. The default settings of your word processing program probably match what you need to do for APA style anyway, because we intentionally designed APA style with these programs in mind to make it easier for writers to set up their papers. This means that for most elements we'll be talking about next, you don't have to make any adjustments to the default settings of your word processing program. You can just open your document and start writing. And if you are writing papers with Academic Writer, APA's tool for teaching and learning effective writing, these default settings are already built into the program, so there are no formatting changes you have to make. Among the default settings you don't have to change are margins. Leave 1-inch margins on all sides, top, bottom, left, and right of the page, which is usually how papers are automatically set up. When there are exceptions to a general guideline, we have noted it in a note box here on the slide. You'll see that at the bottom. Sorry, I don't know why it moved on me. And here we know that there are specific types of papers that may have different requirements for margins, even when those papers are being written in APA style, the most common being dissertations and theses. You'll also use the same font throughout the text of your paper. And acceptable fonts include sans serif fonts like 11-point Calibri and 11-point Arial, and serif fonts like 12-point Times New Roman and 11-point Georgia. However, other fonts are also acceptable. Font specifications were made more flexible in the 7th edition to address needs for accessibility and include a variety of sans serif and serif fonts. For other font options and what makes them accessible, see section 118 of the concise guide. As noted here, different fonts and font sizes are acceptable in figure images, and when using the default setting for footnotes appearing in the page footer. We'll talk more about options for font and figures later in this presentation. Lines are double spaced throughout the entire paper. This includes on the title page, abstract, text, reference list, and elements within the text like table and figure titles and notes, headings, and block quotations. This is something you usually have to go into your paragraph functions and set, but once you do, you will not have to change the spacing for pretty much the entirety of your paper. Just double space everything. This means you don't have to worry about adding extra lines anywhere in the text. Don't add extra lines between paragraphs. And don't add black lines before or after headings, even if the heading is the last line of a page. There are a few exceptions noted at the bottom here. For instance, in tables and figures, there are line spacing options for optimizing presentation and improving readability. And when you do add an extra line after the paper title on the title page and between a table or figure and any text on the same page. And we'll cover these points in more detail in their sections of the presentation. Another formatting element that is the default setting in most word processing programs is paragraph alignment and indentation. All text in the body of the paper is aligned to the left margin.
Hello, folks. This is Mark from ACRL in Choice. Apologies, it looks like we're having a brief technical difficulty here. I think perhaps we have lost Haley. So,
I'm still here. You can make me the presenter if you'd like until she comes
all right,
back.
yeah. Let me
That would be totally
transition
fine.
over to Chelsea. Sorry about that, folks. We will make that change right now.
Hi, everyone. Okay, let's see. Where were we? We were last talking about paragraph alignment and indentation, I think. Let's see. For paragraph alignment and indentation, what you're going to want to do when you're writing your text is to align everything to the left margin. And then paragraphs of text are, the first line is indented half an inch. We recommend that you either use the tab key or the automatic paragraph formatting function of your word processing program to set paragraph indents rather than hitting the space bar, because that's going to create more consistent formatting. And then last, use the setting where the right margin is ragged. That means that the lines are different lengths rather than full justification, because that creates a smoother reading experience. Other alignments are used in other parts of APA style student papers. For example, center alignment is used on the title page and for level 1 headings and section labels, and in parts of tables and figures. And then in reference entries, we use a hanging indent. We're going to go over all of that in more detail. This beginning here is just sort of an overview of what you can expect. For page numbers appear on every page of an APA style paper. You should put the page number in the top right corner of every page in the page header. So whatever word processing program you're using, you should use the page numbers function to put in the page numbers, starting with page number 1, which appears on the title page. Now, if you've been with APA style for a while, you might know about the running head. For student papers no longer require a running head. You can see in the image on the screen that the top margin or the page header contains just the page number. Welcome back, Haley. All is well. Okay. Mark, can you give control back to Haley, please, so she can present this part? Thank you.
Continue. Yep.
Hi all, sorry so much about that. We're getting a lot of rain in our area. I don't know about you, but thank you, Chelsea, for taking over.
No worries.
And let's hope I can survive through the rest of this presentation. So moving on, now this slide is comparing the elements of student papers versus professional papers. And as I mentioned earlier, the previous section covered everything that universally applies to all APA style papers, except for a few exceptions like the running head. And there are some distinctions, however, between the two general types of APA style papers, which shown here are student papers, which are new to the 7th edition and reflect the increasing number of instructors, departments, institutions that have adopted APA style and use it with their students writing scholarly papers, versus professional papers, which are usually considered manuscripts being submitted for publication to a journal and were traditionally the focus of the publication manual. And as shown, both student papers and professional papers will contain text and usually have a reference list and often tables and figures. Although again, the specific elements of a student paper are determined by the assignment instructions. All APA styles papers also require a title page. But now there are 2 formats for the title page, student and professional. And in addition, manuscripts submitted for publication commonly include an abstract and keyword, as well as things like appendices and footnotes. Student papers do not typically include these elements unless specifically requested by the instructor. Finally, as previously described, both types of papers have a header, whereas the header in student papers includes just the page number. The header of professional papers includes both the page number plus the running head, shortened version of the paper title. The abstract, appendices, running head, as well as all paper sections are described in detail in Chapter 2 of the publication manual. You can also view a full sample professional as well as student paper at the end of that chapter, which includes call-outs to show how specific elements appear when implemented, or download both papers for free on the APA Style website, and the URL is shown there on your screen. Shown here is a comparison of the two types of title pages in APA Style. Again, we used to have only the professional title page, and now we have that and the student title page. If you are writing a student paper, you should use the student title page format, unless the instructor requests otherwise. Authors submitting a manuscript for publication should use the professional title page format, as well as follow any specific instructions requested by that journal. The development of the student title page reflects the different needs of the two types of authors, whereas it is important for professional authors to disclose information in an author note. That obviously doesn't apply to students, whereas it is helpful for both students and their instructor to have information on the title page of their paper for things like the course to which they are submitting their paper and the assignment due date. But many title page elements are shared across the two paper types as shown here. All title pages include the paper title, the author's names, and the author affiliation. Then the student title page includes information on the course and the assignment, specifically the course number and name, the instructor of the course's name, and the assignment's due date. Professional papers instead include an author note, the format and content of which have been updated for the 7th edition. Elements of professional paper title pages are described in the publication manual in sections 2.3 and the author note in section 2.7. You can also view sample professional and student title pages in chapter 2 of the publication manual and concise guide. And now I'll transition from talking about the paper as a whole to breaking down to each section, which Chelsea will cover, starting with the student title page.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. So we're going to talk here about the student title page. And this is a new title page format that we have premiered in the 7th edition. And on your screen, you'll be able to see the elements of the student title page, which include the title of the paper, the name of the author, which would be you, the student, the affiliation, which is going to be where you go to school, including the department or the division of the course that you're taking, the instructor of your class that you're writing the assignment for, your due date for the assignment, and the page number in the page header. So let's look at an example. Here we have an example student title page. You're just looking at the top half of the page because that's what's going to fit on your screen. But what we can see here is how all of the elements look when they're done. And we're going to go through each of the different aspects of formatting as we go through the presentation. So here you can see the page number, the paper title, the author name, their affiliation, the course number and name, the instructor name, and the due date. For the due date, we recommend that you use whatever date format is used in your country. For example, in the United States, we say September 10th. If you write 10 September 2020, that's also fine. And likewise, you should use for the course number, name, and instructor name, use the information that's on your class syllabus or your instructional materials. Next, we're going to go into more detail about the byline and affiliation format. So what that means is your name of who's writing the paper and where you go to school. So the three variations that might apply to you are when you have one author who is from one school, two authors who are from the same school, probably the same class, or three authors, maybe if you're doing a group project, probably all at the same school. And so what you'll do is you'll put your name or names on one line, and then on the line below, add the name of the class and then the name of your institution, such as the name of your university. If you have two authors, you put the word "and" in between them. And if you have three or more, you use commas after the names and then an "and" before the final author. Now we're going to look at line spacing on the title page. you want to double space the whole title page. Place the title 3 or 4 lines down from the top of the title page. The slides are changing on me and I'm not sure why, but okay, we're back to line spacing. Place the title 3 or 4 lines down from the top of the page, and then you're going to want to put an extra line between the title and the author names. And otherwise, these are just on successive lines. Okay. Next, we're going to look at the alignment on the title page. You'll want to right align the page number that's in the page header, and everything else on the title page is centered. So that's pretty straightforward. For font on the title page, the paper title is in bold and everything else is in standard font. So that means no bolds, no italics for anything else on the title page except for the paper title. Next, we're going to talk about your text. So text is the content of the paper that you're writing. So if you're doing a literature review, it's where you explore all the studies in the literature. Or if you're writing a response paper, it's where you're writing your response. That's the text. So now we're going to look at those same things, starting with the elements. So the elements of the text begin by you repeat the paper title at the top of the first page of text. And then you're going to go into your introduction, where you're providing background and context about whatever it is that you're writing about. Within the text, you can use headings to identify sections. Some really classic ones, if you're writing a quantitative research paper, are method, results, and discussion. However, sections and headings you use are going to vary depending on what you're writing and how complicated the paper is. It's not required to use headings, and you can pick your own headings depending on what you're doing. Additionally, text can also incorporate tables and figures. It can include block quotations and other elements. Here is a diagram showing text elements. This is the first page of the text. You can see the page number 2 up in the top right-hand corner. And the paper title is repeated at the top of the first page of text. And you can see that there in bold and centered. And then below that is the introduction to the paper. Talking about line spacing of the text, we want to double space the whole text, including headings, section labels, paragraphs, block quotations, everything. Continuing on for alignment of the text, you'll center the paper title at the top of the first page of text. And then here, the paragraph alignment is that left aligned with ragged right margin. So you can see that the first line of the paragraph is indented by ½ inch, and then the ragged right margin, the lines are different lengths rather than full justification. This diagram explains block quotation alignment, because that is a little bit different than standard paragraph alignment. What you do if you have a block quotation, which is a quotation that's 40 words or longer, what you do is you indent the entire quotation from the left margin. So on the screen, there's a blue box around the quotation, and the whole thing has been indented from the left margin by ½ inch. And you can do that with your tab key or your paragraph formatting. You can also use styles in your styles menu to apply this formatting as well. There's lots of ways to achieve it. And then, of course, the block quotation is still double spaced. Now let's talk about font in the text. You should use the same font throughout the text. Write your body text in standard font, so that means not bold and not italic. When you do use bold and italic, it's going to be for the headings, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So within your text that you're writing, you're going to, if you need to do emphasis, you would use italics, but you should do that only sparingly. For example, if you're introducing an important key term, you can put the term in italics the first time you mention it to draw people's attention to it. And thereafter, you wouldn't use italics again. But again, you should keep italics to a minimum, because if you overdo it, it can make it more challenging to read your text. Now we're going to talk more in depth about headings. So headings are what you use within the text to identify different sections of your paper. In the 7th edition, we have a new format for heading levels. There are 5 levels, and you use them going in order. So like level 2 is a subsection of level 1, level 3 is a subsection of level 2. And this table is in both our publication manual and the concise guide to APA style, as well as on our website. So it's a great reference to just check this out when you're doing the formatting. Looking at this more in depth, what it boils down to is alignment-wise for headings, level 1 is centered, level 2 and 3 are left aligned, and level 4 and 5 are indented like a paragraph and end with a period. Font-wise, all headings are bold. Levels 3 and 5 are also italic. And you can use heading styles in your word processing program to apply these headings. If you're using Academic Writer, which is APA's product to write your papers, it's already built in. If you're using a program like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, you can update the styles yourself if you'd like. And additionally, we have sample papers on the APA Style website that have the heading styles saved as part of the document. And you can download that and then save that to your computer as well. This diagram shows 5 levels of heading. It's very unlikely that a student paper would include 5 levels of heading, but it is possible. So this shows sort of how they look without any text in between. One situation that commonly arises with student papers is you might want to use a heading within your introduction. So this diagram shows at the top, you have your paper title, and then you begin writing your introduction. But note that you don't use the heading introduction, because it has to be the introduction, because it's what's at the beginning of the paper. If you do want to have headings within your introduction, you can use level 2 headings as shown in the diagram, where the words genetic factors and environmental factors are subheadings of the introduction. And then whatever's the next big section after that goes with the level 1 heading. So. All right, we're going to transition now to talking about tables and figures, and Tim is going to tell you all more about that.
Now I'm unmuted. Hi, thanks, Chelsea. Yes, tables and figures. So the first thing to note is that the guidelines in this presentation are about APA style. For tables and figures in particular, your school, your instructor may have different guidelines, and as always, we recommend that you follow those first. Second, we have tables and figures on our website, as well as in Chapter 7, lots of examples. And for this presentation, we have a series of slides next that show the elements within tables and figures, and then later I'll talk about the placement of the tables and figures themselves in the paper. So on this slide, you can see the 4 elements of a table. One key update with 7th edition is the tables and figures follow the same structure, which makes it easy to remember. So you can see here that you start with the number, a number line, a title, the table body or the figure image, and then the note if you need one. And on the next slide, you can see that in the figure, it's the same. You got the figure number, the figure title, the image, figure body, and then the note if you need one. Okay, so my slides are also moving. So let's see, 34. Here, for table line spacing, you double space the table number and the title. If the title is longer than the 1 line shown here, you double space the entire title. And you can see an example of that in the publication manual, table 7.12. And then the body of the table is also, you can single space it 1.5 space it or double space it. And I'm quoting from the manual here, depending on which presentation most effectively conveys information to readers. For example, single spacing may allow a table to fit better on one page. So you might have a table that if you double spaced it, it would have one line bumping to the next page, and if you just did 1.5 spacing, it fits nicer on a page, so do that. And then the table note is double spaced. Okay, so then within figures, double space the number and the title, and then double space the note. And then within the figure, use the default settings and then adjust as needed for readability within the figure. Just use your best judgment. All right, so table alignment. Left align the number and the title. Left align the table itself, meaning that the first column of the table will be aligned with the table number and the title and the note below. Left align the table note. And then center the table within the body of the table, center the table headings. And then for data, center the data if it's short, like the percentage and the end column in this example, and left align it if it's long, like the first column. So you can see there's some room for variability in using your judgment here. Just be sure that if you've decided to left align or center based on those criteria, that you do it throughout the entire column. And then figure alignment, very similar. Left align the number and the title, left align the image itself, and left align the note. You can see in the image itself, there is a little bit of white space beside the word frequency. That's because the image has that white space in it when you put it in, but it would be the picture that you put in here would be left aligned with the table number and title and note. And then within the body of the figure, default alignments are fine for labels and such. Table fonts. So fonts are going to be the same. It's the same font that you chose for the text of your paper used in the body of the table. And the only differences here are you're going to bold the line with the table number. Use italics for the table title and use title case, meaning capitalize the major words in the title. The body uses the same regular font that you've chosen for the paper. And in the note, all the same font except for the word note, which you italicize. Really wants me to go to that next slide. So fonts for the figure are similar. Bold the figure number, italics, and title case for the title. And then within the figure, use a sans serif font. We recommend a sans serif font in between 8 and 14 points. Usually the default settings are fine, but you can change the fonts, the font size if you need to. The goal is for the figure to be readable within the confines of that figure. Then the note, italicize the word note and regular text for the rest of the note. Okay, so then all of that was about the elements within tables and figures, and now I'll talk a little bit about how you place those tables and figures in the paper. So you have two options in an APA style paper for placing the tables and figures. The first is to place them all at the end. So all the tables and all the figures on separate pages after the reference list. You'd start with the first table and then the next table on a new page, and once you've gone through the tables, you would include the figures. That's often how publishers ask an author to submit their manuscript for publication. The second option is to embed the tables right in the text shortly after you mention them. So that's usually best for students. Again, depending on what your instructor thinks, but that's what we recommend for students. And that's what we'll show in the next examples. So the first thing I sort of already mentioned is that the first thing to do is to mention that you have a figure or a table, and then that helps you know where to place it. So you'll place it after the first mention. And we refer to that as a call out, so a table call out or a figure call out, and that's the wording you'll see in the manual too. So then your options are to, we recommend embedding the table or figure at the bottom of a page or at the top of a page or by itself on a page. And in the next couple slides, we'll see all of those examples. We generally recommend not putting the figure in the middle of a page just because it sort of interrupts the flow for the reader. You have a few lines and then a space and then your table and then another space and then a few more lines. So we generally recommend not doing that. But let's look at what we do recommend. So if the table or figure, if you put it on the bottom of a page, you'll want a one double-spaced line above the figure to separate it from the text. And as you can see, the call out is first. So you've got a call out toward the end of that sentence, and then you've got room on this page, so a little space, and then the figure. The next option might be if the call out appears sort of lower on the page and you're not going to have room, the call out is on page 5 in this example, and then the table appears at the top of the next page. And then this is the same example, that same table at the top of the page. You can see that there's a line of space and then the text continues. So if the table is really long, or long enough to fit a page, just put it on a page by itself after it's been mentioned in the earlier text. And as you can see here, it's a page with just a table, but it's still a numbered page. You still have a number. And for an even longer table, even if you single space it and it's still going to continue, that's not something we show here, but we do have guidelines for that. You can find in section 718 in the manual. Okay, so on to the reference list. I have just a few slides about reference lists because there are two elements to consider in the reference list: the references section label and the alphabetical list of references. So the label references begins at the top of the page on a new page, and then the spacing is double spacing the entire reference list, including that section label. So just like the paper body, double spaced throughout. So that is to say, don't manually go in and add lines between the references. The hanging indent really helps the reader see where new references begin without that extra space. So for alignment, again, the word references at the top is centered and bold, and then a hanging indent is applied to the references. We really recommend not tabbing over or using spacing to get that hanging indent, because if you go in and if you make any edits later, it gets thrown off anyway, and you can't ever get it just kind of perfect. Your software generally has a hanging indent built in. It's usually defaulted to the right spacing. And you can just make all your references and then select all and apply that hanging indent if you don't like, if it's find it distracting while you're writing, or I like to apply it to the first one, and then just as you write, as you add references, they just appear with the hanging indent. It's another case where if you're using Academic Writer, those will be formatted automatically. And so the last thing in references for this presentation is about fonts. And so you use the same font that you've used throughout the body of your paper, and you apply bold to the word references at the top. And then within the references, you have mostly regular text. You will have some italics either in the title elements or in the source elements. And you can see a couple of examples here, but if you want to learn more about that, we did an earlier webinar you can find on our site or the ACRL site, that our YouTube channel, that goes into a lot more detail about how to decide. But those are the fonts you'll have in the reference list. Oh, and we have lots of example references on our website. Okay, so assuming you've done all that, you've made it to the end of the paper, you are almost ready, but you want to double check. So we've got some suggestions here on what to double check. So start by checking the page order. You're going to start each section of the paper on a new page, and that means starting the title page, and then the text begins on page 2. If you've embedded tables and figures within the paper, check that each table or figure has been called out before where it's embedded. Sometimes if you're rewriting or editing, you move things around, and now your call out might be not before the table or figure. So make sure that it is, that you can easily just search for a table or the word table or figure to find your first mention. Sometimes you mention it and then you decide to mention it earlier, so you double check that. Check that your references begin on a new page, and then the reference list begins on a new page. And then the note here is about whether you've added an abstract. If your instructor wants an abstract, that'll be on page 2, and then your text will start on page 3. And if you have tables and figures at the end instead of embedded, they will be after the reference list, starting with the tables and then going to the figures. And you can see both cases of where to place tables in the sample papers that we have on our website. Okay, so after you've done those checks, we'd start right back at the top again and look just at the headings. So we would check that the wording of the headings actually reflects what's in that section. Sometimes, again, with rewriting, or you just want to check that your heading accurately reflects what the section actually says now that you're done. And the next thing is to start each main section with a level 1 heading, and then use level 2 headings for the subsections within that introduction, and to use the same level of heading for sections of equal importance. So method, results, and discussion are at the same level of importance, so those would be all at the same level of heading, typically level 1, but wherever they happen to fall based on the structure of your paper. Another example might be if you have experiment 1 and experiment 2, you'd want those both to be at the same level of heading, obviously. And avoid having only one subsection within a section. So if you have a section and only one subsection, if it's long enough and it makes sense to add a second subsection, then there you go 2 subsections. Otherwise, maybe take that subsection out. Okay, so it may seem obvious, but check the instructions. As we've noticed, sometimes instructor guidelines are different from APA style, so check for that. Likewise, if you're writing a thesis or dissertation, check with your advisor or check your university's guidelines. Often a mix of APA style and some custom adaptations. And then reread the specific assignment to be sure that your final paper has met those guidelines. And final checks. These are some suggestions. First, budget time for these, so that if you get feedback or so ask for feedback from a classmate or writing center tutor or instructor. Basically anyone any feedback is good, and build in time to actually implement suggestions. Also spell check and grammar check. Run those and make changes as needed. And proofread the paper yourself. Rereading a paper as many times as you have time for is always good. And finally, consult your writing center. That's what they're there for. So diagrams, I saw some questions about this in the chat. These will all be up on our instructional aids page. I believe they already are. So the diagrams that were in this presentation are there at the link you see. And while you're there, look at the handouts. We have lots of handouts and guides, sample papers, tutorials, webinars. This link here is the simple link that will get you to all of that. And if we haven't already, I'm sure we can put that in the chat or Q&A. I see someone say, read it out loud. Yeah, definitely, that helps a lot. You really catch things reading it out loud that you, just once you hear it, you hear it. So that does it. If there are additional polls, answer those, please. And we love the feedback. And I know that Haley's been monitoring the chat for additional questions. Oh, I've lost control of the thing. There's one more slide here about contact info for us, but whoever's got control now can move to that slide. There we go.
Thanks, Tim. And then Chelsea and I have been responding, and probably you as well, to a lot of questions in the Q&A. So hopefully that's been helpful. A lot of them have been about sharing the slides or presentation. And as Tim mentioned, this webinar is recorded and will be available through ACRL Choice and on the APA Style website shortly after. And then most of the content, including the annotated diagrams and the guidance, is all shown in one really helpful PDF, that student paper setup guide, via the instructional aids page of the APA Style website.
Yes, thank you, Haley. So if you're loving slides, which we're glad if you do, the diagrams that are on the slides are what's in the diagrams. And there's a link to that in the chat, and I have replied to many of you with that as well. When you go to the APA Style website, one of the main headings on the page is instructional aids. We have all sorts of helpful resources there for students as well as professional authors. So the student paper setup guide is the one that pertains to this webinar that you saw today. I'd also like to go through and answer some of the questions that are coming up in the chat that we thought would be good to answer for everybody. Somebody asked about, will there be time to talk about PowerPoints? I can assume maybe from that you're talking about creating a PowerPoint presentation. That might be an assignment that a student has to do, make a PowerPoint, and they say put it in APA style. For that, there's a lot of guidelines that APA style that apply to PowerPoint presentations. For example, using the references format, you would want to keep that. Likewise, the guidance on bias-free language and on creating tables and figures. However, a PowerPoint presentation is different than a research paper. And so guidance about, for example, font size, you don't have to use 12-point font on your PowerPoint presentation. In fact, probably don't use 12-point font because it's probably not big enough for people to read. And so basically you have a lot of latitude to do what looks good for the content you want to present in a PowerPoint presentation. And I will pop a link in the chat. We have more information about PowerPoint on our APA Style website. So I'll go find that for you all.
Thanks, Chelsea. And then I'll also mention, I've seen some people asking about writing platforms. And the one that I mentioned that is by default set up for APA Style is Academic Writer. And for Microsoft Word, we have no control, unfortunately, over those templates. And so we know that it's still in the 6th edition. And that's something we recommend contacting Word about. Although if you look at the sample paper on the website, Chelsea, it's set up with the heading styles in it for Word, right?
Yes, that's right. And I will pop that link in the chat as well. So that's the student sample papers. Okay, link.
And then I've also seen a couple questions related to things like references and citing sources. And we didn't obviously cover that in this presentation, but we do have 2 full webinars each, one on creating references and one on writing in-text citations in 7th edition style. And both of those are recorded and again posted via the instructional aids on the APA Style website.
Great. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? I have some questions of people who are interested in a Spanish translation of the manual, as well as translations into other languages. When we had the 6th edition, we had, I think, at least 10 or 11 different languages, and we're in the process of getting those things developed. They are not available now, and I'm sorry we don't have a date to tell you, but when the Spanish translation happens, it will be announced on the website with great fanfare. So we will be excited to let you know when that when that is ready.
I
Somebody
saw a
here,
question about callouts and just whether if you mentioned the table or figure, 15 times in the paper, they're all callouts and mentions of the same thing. We just use the word callout, but the placement is the thing that it appears after the first time it's mentioned.
yeah. There's some questions here about how do heading levels work. So heading levels, when we talk about headings, those are the headings that are within the text of your paper. And what you'll want to do is to think about the structure of the thing that you're writing and identify what are the sections that you want to draw a reader's attention to. So for example, if you're doing a literature review and you're writing about various different studies, you might have sections about the different aspects of the topic and then a conclusion. And so one of your headings at the end might be conclusion. We additionally have information about headings both in the manual and on our APA style website, and I'm going to pop a link to headings into the chat. All right. Okay, great question here. Students seem confused. Faculty do not always address this issue. Are in-paragraph citations required when using multiple sources? Otherwise, how is it clear what came from where? That's an important question, and proper citation requires that you explain what came from where. What we recommend is that if you have one sentence that has one source, that you want to put the citation with the information that you're writing about. If you have multiple sources that cite the same information, you can cite those sources at the same time in the same set of parentheses. And we actually have a whole webinar that we did on in-text citations that is available on the APA-style website, and I'll post a link for you, that addresses with examples how in-text citations work for exactly this case and related ones. Question here, in cases where the title might run over 2 lines, can you separate them? Do you just let it go? You can do it how you want on the front, on your title page or your cover page. You can break it, make it look nice. That is totally fine. All right, Haley or Tim, are you seeing other questions pop up that you're wanting to address?
I think you hit on a lot of the big ones. I've seen a lot of specific questions, again, about things like references, citations, plagiarism, and I've responded to some people by sending links, but I really encourage everyone to go on the APA Style website and look at our style and guideline pages, which address a lot of specific topics, and also at the handouts on the instructional aids page, because a lot of them are addressing a lot of these questions that instructors have questions about, and maybe useful resources to show to your students. For instance, the one I've sent a couple of people to is the Avoiding Plagiarism and Self-Plagiarism Guide. So if you want to give students kind of a rough intro, what it means to commit plagiarism and self-plagiarism and avoid those, that's a great resource to start with. And there's many others like that on the handouts and guides page, as well as the Basics of APA Style tutorial, which provides kind of a broad overview of all aspects of APA style at an intro level. I also do see a question here about the difference between the concise guide and publication manual, which I think is a great question. And so the concise guide is kind of the abridged version of the publication manual. It contains the content is identical, except we've limited concise guide to kind of the student-specific content and eliminated the content that is probably more relevant to professional authors on things like journal article reporting standards, ethics in publishing, and the publishing process, and really limited to the stuff that will be applicable to student papers. And again, if you're looking for templates to use for your Microsoft Word APA style papers, I recommend looking at the sample papers on the APA style website, which are created with the heading levels in line. We also have a heading levels template on the instructional aids page. It kind of models APA style.
I see two more questions I would want to address. I see is there a maximum length for the title of your paper? There used to be guidance about, it was like 12 words and that was it. We have removed that guidance in the 7th edition. We recommend that your titles be concise. So that means that you don't put lots of extra words in there, like try to express it concisely, but also making sure that you're grabbing people's interest. Your assignment, if you're writing a dissertation, might have more specific requirements than that, in which case you should follow them. But we know that it's just going to depend on what you're writing about, what your title is going to be. I've also seen some questions about creating tables and figures. To do that, we recommend that you use the tables like creation function of your word processing program, or you can use like the figure creation software, like that's part of Microsoft Word or Google Docs or Excel or Academic Writer. All of those are ways to make tables and figures. And someone here also asked about using color in figures. Generally speaking, it depends on how you're going to be delivering your paper of whether it's a good idea to use color or not. If your paper is going to be printed out, then using color might not be advisable because you don't know whether it's going to translate into grayscale. And if you do use color, you're going to want to check for adequate contrast. We have recommendations on the APA style website for how to use color in figures, and I will pop a link to that into the chat as well. So it is okay to use color, but try to use colors that are going to be high contrast, and it's great if everything is labeled so that you can make sure that people can understand it even if they have color vision deficiency or just no color printer. I see some people saying, I'm deciding between the full 7th edition book versus the concise guide. Students, we made the concise guide for you. Check that out. Grad students might like the full thing, and our website is great for everyone.
Yeah, and I'll also end, I guess we're getting close, by saying that we know we didn't get to everyone's questions. You're also, I believe it's still up, welcome to email styleexpert@apa.org with your specific questions that we were unable to answer during this presentation.
All right, excellent. Well, this is Mark from ACRLN Choice jumping in here at the end. Just wanted to say thank you so much, especially to Chelsea for jumping in there with a little bit of extra speaking time.
You're welcome.
And to Haley and Tim. I think there's lots of indicators coming through the chat and the Q&A and elsewhere, just letting you know how valuable this presentation has been. So thank you so much for taking the time to put it on. There are always questions about whether we recorded this or not. We did, and within about a day or so, depends on how long it takes Zoom to spit out the recording, we'll send that out to everybody who signed up for the webinar. So please be on the lookout for the recording sometime tomorrow, probably. And with that, I would just take a moment to say thank you to all of you who joined us today. We appreciate your taking the time to sit in and learn learn a bit more about 7th edition APA style. We hope that you'll check out some of our webinars in the near future. All right, thanks very much, and I hope that all of you have a great rest of your day.